Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where it's a pretty nice day here in Tokyo. I'm trying to get a lot of videos made because we're going out of town to Karuizawa, and I won't have time to make any videos while we're there. So if you see a few videos of me wearing this t-shirt, that means that it's one of this series of videos I've made for while we are away. The subject of today's video is going to be another Yashica camera, one which is quite a bit different from the other Yashica cameras I've reviewed because this is a half-frame Yashica camera. The half-frame format became really popular in the late 1950s when Olympus designed and released the Olympus pen, which turned out to be, I guess, a grand slam home run for the Olympus company. And that was the camera which really put Olympus on the map in regards to being a top camera maker. And the popularity of the pen series made the half-frame format seem like a good market for other makers. And so Canon and Yashica, Ricoh and Minolta and other companies jumped on and began producing their own half-frame format cameras. Now you probably wonder why half-frame format cameras became such a thing in those days, but the answer is that they were very economical. In those days, people were quite a bit more careful with their money than they seem to be today. People in the late 1950s, early 60s were old enough to remember the Great Depression and the World War and things like that, and they always lived with thinking that something bad could happen again, and it's better to be safe than sorry. So they were very careful with their money. They saved what they could, and they spent as little as they could. My parents and grandparents were kind of from this generation. My parents and grandparents owned cameras, and us kids were never allowed to touch them for two reasons. The first reason that kids tend to break things, and cameras are easy to break. And second, that film and developing film was expensive, or at least in their opinion, it was expensive. So in order to kind of appeal to this more frugal or, stingy market, the half-frame format camera was kind of the perfect thing. They could make a smaller camera, which was less expensive because there were less materials and parts involved in making a smaller camera. And second, you got twice as many exposures on a 35mm roll of film. 24 exposure roll would give you 48 exposures, and 36 exposure roll, of course, gives you 72 exposures. So very economical, and also any lab which could process ordinary 35mm film could process half-frame format film. As popular as these cameras were with people who own them, they were kind of hated by film processors because it was kind of hard for them to you say, well, it's a 30, you get many more exposures, we should be charging more money for this or whatever. And it was kind of, a lot of the film processing companies in those days hated the half-frame format. But anyway, this particular one, the Yashica Half 17, was made in 1964, and Yashica produced a few different half-frame cameras. This is the most common one, and it featured a 32mm f1.7 lens, and that's why they call it the Half 17. There was one which also came with an f1.4 lens, and then there was another camera which was called the 72E. In some markets it was called the Minimatic or Minimatic S, which was also used on full-frame 35mm cameras. Kind of an odd thing in those days because in markets around the world, certain brand names were, I guess, copyrighted or trademarked or whatever. Like the Ford Mustang, if it was sold in Germany, couldn't be called a Mustang. In that market, it was called the T5. So say, I have a Ford T5, and what the hell is that? Oh, in America, it's called a Mustang. So it's kind of a weird thing with some of these cameras. Most of the numbered cameras, not a big deal. Just you could use what they wanted, but still, if you chose a name for it, like Minimatic, I guess that was the name of maybe like a small machine gun or something in another country, so they just called it the 72E. The Half 17 is kind of an interesting camera in that it looks like a little brother to the Yashica Electro 35. It features the same satin chrome finish, the same rounded edges, the same kind of, I guess, appearance to the controls on the lens, and also the same kind of system for adjusting the film speed. This was produced around the time that the Yashica Electro 35 series was being developed, and obviously the same designers had a part in both cameras. The half 17, as it was supposed to be a less expensive camera, did not feature the advanced electronics which came in the Electro 35. And by advanced electronics, I mean like a few transistors and a light cell and a 5.6 volt battery, or what Yashica called a brain. And despite its simplicity, it was incredibly accurate and very reliable and worked quite well. But it was too big and too expensive to fit in a camera like the half 17. So the half 17 did with a simple selenium light meter. And selenium is responsive to light. Like solar panels, you shine a certain amount of light on them and they put out a certain amount of electricity. The light meter cells in these cameras work the same way. And the amount of electricity moves the light meter on the inside, and there are catches for the aperture and shutter, and depending on where you push the shutter button down and this needle is, it will set the aperture and shutter settings depending on the mode you have programmed into the camera. It's a very simple, fully mechanical system which doesn't have any electronic control other than the electric current coming from the light, which goes to the light meter. And that just moves the needle. It doesn't actually operate the mechanism for the camera. It's a really good system which Olympus used quite successfully on some of their earlier cameras, the EE pins and the Trip 35 was, I guess, the most famous of the cameras to use this kind of system. For the most part, it's really reliable, really simple, and a lot less expensive than putting in an electronic brain inside a camera. Let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the half 17. And starting at the top here, we have this nice rounded top cover, which I said before resembles that on the Electro 35 cameras. We have a shoe for mounting a flash gun here, and we have a PC sync socket located on the side. You can use a modern flash with this camera. Supposedly when you use this camera with the flash, it reverts to the 1/30th of a second shutter speed, and kind of like the Yashica CC and CCN cameras, which came out a few years later. And then for operating with the flash, you just use whatever aperture the flash recommends. Here we have the film speed adjusting dial, and it doesn't have a really wide range of speeds from, I guess, ASA 21 all the way up to 400, which is pretty much all you need for modern film. Nowadays, it's not exactly easy to find 1600, 3200, or 6400 speed film unless you buy really old expired stuff. Most of the film you get nowadays is between, say, 50 and 200. Occasionally, you can find 400 film. Some, I think they're Superior 400 and a couple of are still on the market. Monochrome film, you're usually, you're kind of limited to Tri-X 400 or I guess the Fuji SS 100. You have a little bit more variety in the color film, but anyway, this is adequate for most of the film that we have available today. We have the shutter release button located over here and accepts a standard cable release. And then we have a film counter window here, and of course this goes all the way up to 72 if you're running a 36 exposure roll of film. I find I can usually get 4 or 5 more exposures, so usually 76, 77 shots on a roll of film. On the back here we have the viewfinder, and it's very small, but it doesn't have to be large because this is a half frame format camera. On the bottom here we have the thumb wheel, which we operate to wind the film and charge the shutter. Kind of odd that it's located on the opposite side here. It takes a little bit of practice. The Olympus pin ones are kind of located here on the top, and I kind of like that system, but compared to the Olympus pin series, I like how this one fits in the hand, and though it's a little bit quirky to get used to winding the film with my left hand, it's not that big of a deal. At the bottom of the camera here, we have a standard 1/4" tripod socket. We have the release lever here for opening the film back. You just pull it downward and the back will pop open. We have the release button, which you have to depress to rewind the film. And over here we have the film rewind knob, which is the identical knob that you'll find on the Yashica Electro 35 camera. Moving to the front of the camera, we have the viewfinder here, and the viewfinder in this camera is a little bit sophisticated compared to other cameras, and that's one of the reasons that this camera is a little bit kind of large on the top. It doesn't feature the sophisticated electronics that you find in the Electro 35 cameras, but it does have some sophisticated mechanisms in the viewfinder. The first thing that there is a focus indicator, and as you focus the lens, you'll see the indicator moving. It's kind of switching between close focus and infinity, showing the usual thing like a face and then people standing and then a mountain, and that gives you an idea of where the focus is set. And then there's a shutter speed indicator here, and when you were taking a photo and you depress the shutter button, you will see the needle move up or down until it selects the shutter speed, which the camera chooses depending on the available light. You can move the shutter speed up or down by simply moving the aperture ring up or down. If you are shooting a too open or too close an aperture, the needle will move up into the upper or lower limits in the over or underexposed zones, and the shutter won't fire. So you kind of have to turn the aperture dial until the needle gets in the area of operable shutter speeds. This is basically a aperture priority automatic camera, but there is a fully automatic system where the camera will choose the aperture and shutter speed combination automatically, so you don't have to mess with it. We have a self-timer indicator here, or not indicator, self-timer lever on the bottom, and here we have the focusing scale, which is arranged in meters. And it has kind of a funny looking depth of field scale here, but it works pretty well, and it's kind of intuitive. The focusing tab here is on the bottom, and this camera is interesting in that it kind of gives you 3 different ways to check the focus. You can see it through the viewfinder, you can look for it here on the focusing scale, or there are detents built into the shutter speed ring, and you can kind of feel it catching these as it goes around. So with a little bit of practice, you can focus this camera by feel without even having to look through it. And on the front here, of course, we have the 32mm f1.7 Yashica lens and the selenium light meter cell around it. Common problems these cameras have are the light meter cell doesn't work, or it's not accurate. I don't have a lot of experience with these cameras yet. I'm planning to take this one apart soon and have a look at the inside and see what makes it tick. A lot of these cameras, the selenium light meters, the light meter is not accurate, but usually somewhere on the light meter there is an adjustment where you can compensate for the deterioration of the selenium coating. The selenium is kind of sensitive to corrosion and degradation over time. It's a good idea if you have a camera with the selenium light meter to store it carefully in a dry place so you don't get any oxidation or corrosion on the light meter surface. Other issues these cameras have is that kind of like the Olympus pin cameras, the shutter can be kind of sticky. This camera has a maximum shutter speed of 1/800th of a second, so in order to get the full potential, you have to make sure that the shutter is clean. I haven't taken the camera apart yet to see how the lens comes out. Maybe I should make a video showing how to take it apart and seeing what's on the inside of the camera. If you're interested in seeing that, please let me know. Another issue these cameras have, or like with all the old Yashica cameras, are with light seals. And this camera uses a lot of light seals in the channels on the top and on the side here, and these channels. So it's a good idea to replace them right away if you get one of these cameras and it otherwise works, because you don't want the material or the dust from this stuff getting inside the mechanism of the camera and gumming things up and making it sticky. Loading film is simple. It's kind of backwards from another camera. Normally when you would put the film on the left side and pull it over to the right, and the winding mechanism is here. As this camera is operated on the left side, it's the other way around. You have to put, I guess it was designed by a left-handed person. You put the film on this side, pull it over to the left, feed it in, and simply wind the winder and depress the shutter until the holes on the film are being taken up by the take-up sprocket. And then close the camera and simply wind until the number 1 pops up in the viewfinder window and the camera is ready to go. So anyway, that's it for my review of the Yashica half-17 half-frame format camera. This one still needs a lot of work to get it into shape, so if I can get it going, I'll go ahead and list it for sale in my stores. I'll be making a few more videos here. I'm trying to get these up about every second or third day, so if you'd like to see these videos, please subscribe. Trying to grow this channel, trying to get more people interested in vintage Japanese and other kinds of cameras. And if you'd like to support us, it always helps to click the like button. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.